Hey guys, welcome to Align Online. Happy Tuesday. Hope you're having an amazing day. My name's Graylin Griffin, and I'm with Alignment Leadership, and I'll be your host for today. I'm really excited about the guest we have. Jennifer Mazzola is amazing, and I cannot wait for you guys to meet her. But before we bring her on, I do want to just encourage people to come on in. Feel free to throw your name into the chat here. Let us know who you are, where you're from. We've got a lot of great things to discuss today, but something I want you to think about as you're getting settled in, just to get the brain the juices flowing and the brain moving, is right now in this crazy time. We've got a lot happening in our world. We got a lot happening in our cities, in our neighborhoods, and communities. What is anchoring you? Just a question, like just to start things off today. What is anchoring you? I really try to lean into, my community, my family, my coworkers, even remotely. It has been so important to spend time, either through Zoom or FaceTime or on a call, just checking in with people. I think isolation is one of those things that can be incredibly detrimental if you are not, doing it in a healthy way. We really need to, yes, honor everything that's going on, the recommendations, but man, make sure you're still taking time to create and foster community for your sake and for everyone else. So that's just my little tidbit, my thought for today as we welcome you in. Go ahead and connect. Let us know who's here. We are excited again to have you, and we're excited about our guest. I cannot wait for you guys to meet her. But come on in. Come on in. All right. Welcome, Cindy. Dr. Short, man, she's awesome. If you don't know her, connect with her. Good to see you. Welcome. What's up, Josh? Josh Boyer. He's up in Minnesota right now, doing a lot of great fishing and time with the family. Hey, Caitlin. Welcome to Align Online. Good to see that you're here. All right, we'll take a couple more minutes and welcome some folks in. Remember, throughout the course of the day, man, if you have any questions or if there's a specific topic that really resonates with you, please engage with us. Throw a question on there, throw a comment in there. We'd love to hear from you. This platform, again, is for that, man. We want to encourage anyone who's a part of this to contribute, to collaborate with us, and we want it to be engaging. And so your comments and feedback really help us do that. Let's make this a conversation. So we're really excited to have you. A couple cool things to just keep on your radar is we do this every week. Align Online is every Tuesday at noon Central Time. And so we encourage you to invite your friends, bring somebody else along. We've also got the book Align. If you guys follow us or you know Chris or our team, Align is the first book that Chris has authored, but it's relaunching and there's new resources available. I know they've just completed the audio book. So as an Audible person, I love Audible. It's one of my favorite apps. I encourage you guys to stay tuned for that. It will be available shortly. And then we'll talk about this a couple times, but the Global Leadership Summit, specifically in Austin or GLS Online, will be taking place August 6th and 7th. So we are just about a little over a month away, man, and it's going to be power packed. It's going to be great. So if you don't have your tickets, there's some information on the screen right now. And because of everything happening, with COVID and shelter in place and the limitations that are put on gatherings, there's going to be an additional opportunity happening in November of this year. So all of that information is available on glsaustin.com. But remember, online will be happening August 6th and 7th. So we really want to encourage you guys to be a part of that. And so we'll get to talk about that a little bit more later. Welcome, Lauren. Thank you so much. Cindy's hanging by the pool. I love that. I love that. Yeah, so we're really excited, man. In everything that's happening right now, we want to do our due diligence as a team, as a community of leaders, professionals. Some of us, are working with people still remotely. Man, it is so important to reconnect to purpose on a a daily basis with your teams and everything that you're doing. Again, we just want to try to eliminate some of the effects, the impact of isolation. And in this time, community is possible. So, and that's again why we're here today. So welcome to Align Online. We're really excited to have you. And just a minute or so, we're gonna bring our guest in, and I cannot wait to just to connect with her, connect with Jen, and excited to introduce you guys. So hang with us for just a sec. There's still time to invite somebody in, let them know we're jumping into this. I love that. Yeah. How are you staying grounded, anchored in this season? I love that. Family, purpose, all of that good stuff. So we're going to go ahead and transition here. Well, I'm excited to welcome Jen to the room. So you guys hang on. She'll be in just a second.
Hey,
Hey, how are you?
good, good. I love this platform. This is awesome. I was just listening to you get everybody welcomed in.
Yeah, did it sound okay? I'm always like super nervous,
You're
that
doing an amazing job,
thank you.
especially when you have like that microphone right in front of you. It makes you look super legit.
I'm legit. It doesn't even work. I just
Yeah,
it's a prop. It's a prop.
that's awesome.
Well, I just want to introduce everyone, guys. This is Jen. Funny story. The first time I met Jen was with one of her teammates, Jeff from ABBA, and
That's right.
and this was a conference, an event space of close to 200 people, and I welcomed them from the stage, and I got her name completely wrong. I even
Oh, that's
said
right.
that you were married to. I was like
To Jeff, yeah.
Jeff and Jen Johnson. And I could see people in the background like, no, that's not the
That's
right
not
thing.
that's not right. It's okay. I immediately text his wife and I was like, so today I'm Jeff's wife.
I felt terrible. And
No, it was awesome.
then I, just kind of deflected and scolded my team. I was like, I'm only as good as my notes, which was terrible. That's the worst thing to do. Don't do that. Uh, but yeah, Jen, tell us a little bit about you and what you do, who you are.
Wow. I mean, I guess I'll kind of back up right before I met you. So I'm actually new to the Austin area. So I love. Hopefully, we've got a lot of Austin people in here. I noticed Cindy's by the pool, and I'm looking outside, and I'm like, I hope it's sunny where you are. It's a little dreary here. I'm in the northeast, I guess, ish area
Mhm.
of Austin. About a year and a half ago, my husband took a job here in the area, and it meant a major move for our family,
Yeah.
and it meant a major move for me. I left a career of about 18 years in full time ministry. So I'm an ordained pastor, and now I'm an ordained pastor without a church.
Yeah.
So I'm figuring out what that looks like here. But in the process of figuring that out, I stumbled into an organization called Austin Bridge Builders Alliance, or
Mm,
we always call ourselves ABBA.
mhm.
And we exist to connect people with purpose, which makes total sense why our partnership with Alignment Leadership to host the GLS, like that's a perfect fit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because as you guys are bringing these teams together and helping keeping people connected right now, we're
Hmm.
saying, hey, when you get connected deeper to that purpose, what does it look like to affect change in your city through that? So I love working with you guys.
Oh man, that's awesome. I will say this, I'm from San Antonio, and one of the things I have raved about since being introduced to ABBA through some mutual friends, mutual connections, like-minded people, is the work that they do in the city of Austin, and in that it is so. Um, I would say it is on a different level when it comes to connecting people in the marketplace, in ministry, with a focused goal, of bridging this gap. And that is one of the things that has really stood out to me. So when you transitioned from Nashville to Austin, what made this particular organization appealing to you?
Um, well, and I realize that we all probably come from different faith backgrounds and understanding, but for me, it was totally an ordained relationship. So when I did move, I had gone from working full time, right, to not. I had told myself I was going to take a season of time to get my two teenage boys settled into this new location.
Mm-hmm.
And I quickly found myself like looking for stuff to do. So a friend of mine who actually lives in Dallas emailed me and said, hey, how do you like Texas? And I said, well, here's the things I love. Like I'm totally into breakfast tacos. That's kind of a cool thing.
Right, right.
Brisket. which is the only thing that is barbecue
The
here.
staples, right?
Yes,
Right.
right. Things I don't like scorpions and rattlesnakes, things that I don't understand.
Right.
But I said, for the most part, I'm settling in. And I said, if you know anyone hosting the GLS, because my church in Nashville had hosted the GLS,
Got it.
let me know. I'd love to volunteer. So he said, we actually have an organization that is hosting the GLS for the first time. This was last year, and they could probably use some volunteers. So I reached out and said, hey, I'd love to like hand out bulletins or, fill up coffee cups.
Yeah.
And fast forward, and I'm coordinating the GLS for the Austin audience, which was significantly different because we had about 1,300 people with us last year,
Right.
which is a big difference from my 200-person attendance in Nashville.
Right.
So
Right.
I kind of stumbled into ABBA. So I volunteered for a while and then just grew to love the organization,
Mhm.
to see what it does in the city. I'd been a part of city movements in Nashville and in the community I lived inside, right outside of Nashville where I grew up and where I lived and was raising my kids. But I'd never seen anybody do it quite like ABBA.
Right.
And Jeff and Rich are phenomenal. And so I
Right.
just wanted to be more connected, and that evolved into working for them.
Yeah. Yeah. No one does it quite like ABBA. And I think that is one of the reasons, like you said, this connection, this relationship, I would say is ordained. Yeah. It's a match made in heaven because we want access to the network because we feel like God has given us something, leading us to like to serve this community. And ABBA, it has done just that. And one of the things that you said that really is unavoidable in this season is all of the connecting you guys do has given you access to some environments, specifically with city leaders. And I know we were talking recently about all of the changes that we've had to the pivots we've had to make with Shelter in Place, specifically for GLS coming up in August. And you shared with me just about your experiences working with city leaders. Could you kind of share with the audience today what that has been like the access that you've been given and the work that ABBA's doing with the city of Austin right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always explain to people, so if we've got these 4 sectors in a city, we've got the business, the marketplace, right? And they have the resources. They have the funding, they have the product, they have the resources that we could use for change. And then you've got the church. So you've got religious leaders. And I think from my perspective, they have the command and the hands. They have the people, they have the army that should be going into these spaces and creating change. And then you've got the nonprofits and the government or civic leaders.
Right.
And they have the need. So when you bring all 3 of those together, we can actually have a conversation, which I think is more rare than we realize. Like, I think we're not really always having actual conversations.
Yes.
So, and I don't think it's that these organizations or these sectors don't want to have conversations. I think it's literally an issue of like, hey, someone bridge the gap.
Right.
Someone be a bridge builder, right? Austin Bridge Builders. And we have these conversations that can actually produce change. So what that looks like on the ground recently, particularly we can use COVID-19 in this season here in Austin, we were a part of a conversation. We were asked by local churches to connect to Mayor Adler and to have a conversation and to get, we got about a dozen church leaders together in a Zoom call with the mayor just to talk about what it looks like to reopen churches.
Right.
Because, I mean, the reality is we operate in kind of 2 different worlds with separation of church and state, but we want to have a healthy dialogue. Now, on that call, I just sat back and was just in awe of, I don't know, I just don't think it's very often that you see people come across denominational lines, people come across political lines, people come across even their own agendas. They just laid all that down and they said, okay, so what does it look like to keep our churches healthy and safe, but also honor the fact that our communities want to gather, but also honor the authorities that are placed over us. Right. So that's a tricky conversation to have. And when I first started or got on the call, I was like, let's see how this is going to go. And as it unfolded, it was a beautiful conversation that ended up with a lot of encouragement and a lot of light bulbs going off for people. Because once we have those conversations, we start to develop an understanding.
Right.
And once we have an understanding, everything changes.
Right.
So that would be one practical example of a dialogue that we get to have often.
Wow, I love that. Once we start having conversations, we can get understanding. And That, in the season that we're in as a society and everything going on in the world, I know recently we were having this conversation, and you made a statement that really resonated with me. You said, they has to become someone we know. They has to become someone you know. And I don't know why that just really, I wrote it down because it resonated with me so strongly. And then this morning I visited your Instagram handle, and I was like, you wrote like a blog post about it. And I just was like, yes, this is it. And I'd love for you, if you guys don't follow Jennifer_Mazzola at Instagram, you need to do so. So check her out, follow her. But this morning's post was like, man, it really just kind of unpacked that idea. And with everything you do, with creating opportunities for connection, to bring about change, to create conversations that lead to understanding, unpack like your thought, your feelings, and your heart behind your post today about they.
Okay. So you and I, last time we talked, we were specifically kind of mentioning the racial tension in our country,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I don't think coronavirus and the racial tension, while they're separate, they're absolutely swirling around each other,
Oh, yeah.
right? So we're living in this sea of confusion in this space when information on either of those topics that is not 100% emotionally charged, and we want it to be emotionally charged because these are emotional things that we're dealing with, whether we're dealing with isolation or getting laid off or getting furloughed, or we're dealing with our concepts and our constructs around the idea of race. So the only thing for me, someone had asked me what I thought it looked like to actually bring about change in a city in terms of the racial tension in the moment. But I think this concept applies across the board.
Right.
And I just said, I think as soon as whoever the they is, now I think for me, it's important to kind of look at who they is, because in the racial dynamic, we tend to think, okay, someone who doesn't look like me. Mm-hmm. But maybe that's not what comes up in everybody's mind. It may be someone who doesn't vote like me. Mm-hmm. Or they may be someone who isn't oriented the way that I am in terms of sexuality, or they don't have my same views of gender, or maybe it's someone who doesn't think theologically like me. We all have a they. Mm-hmm. And we can catch ourselves in conversation when we say things like, well, they just don't get it. Mm-hmm. Or if they would just fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Or if they would just understand this, or all they want. I mean, we've got theys, it's almost unavoidable. But when we take they, mm-hmm. and we dive into a relationship with they, and they becomes a person, and not just like a token relationship. Like, hey, I have to have my token friend that believes differently than me, or hey, I have to have my token friend that looks differently than me. I'm talking about a real relationship and conversation where we talk about the things that are awkward to talk about.
Right.
And I know that in certain circles that's harder than in others, but I do think the closer we can get to that, the more we can say, hey, I really don't understand this feeling. Because, you and Zach and I were talking mm-hmm. before we even hopped on this call, and the awesome, Align music started playing for the countdown. Oh, yeah. And we were talking about how all of us have had experiences in youth ministry in the past, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in that conversation, immediately we went to, we know what lock-ins feel like. Mm-hmm. We know how much pizza we've had to eat.
Yeah.
And it's because we had this shared identity. Mm-hmm. So we didn't have to waste time talking about all let me explain to you what youth ministry is like, because we were all there. Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, in the world, we can't do that with everybody. So we do have to have conversations so we can catch up to that shared identity.
Yeah.
Right. So that what is sympathy can move closer to empathy, mm-hmm. so that we can actually relate more, because we don't have the same experiences.
Right.
And as long as, I think a scene that comes to mind for me all the time when I think of they is I think of the scene where, and this is obviously my background is theology. So I think of the scene where Jesus and Jesus is eating in Matthew's house. So Matthew's a tax collector. He's definitely a they for a lot of people.
Right.
Matthew's got his own theys. But the disciples of John the Baptist and the disciples of Jesus are having this conversation, and they're like, what is your rabbi, what is your teacher doing in there eating with them? Mm-hmm. And so if you're wondering, like, so who's my they? Picture, if you have some, like maybe it could be a boss or a mentor or a pastor, and if you saw them eating in there with them, mm-hmm. that would be the group you'd be like, what are they doing with them? That's probably the person you need to have a conversation with.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
probably the person you need to take to coffee and just start that dialogue. Even as awkward as it is. I mean, Graylin, I know that you and I know each other as acquaintances, but I think that if I said to you, hey, I want to actually understand your perspective on some things, I think you'd welcome that conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think more people would than we give them credit for. And so I think that I think I actually wrote that after you and I had our first conversation. And I thought, you know what, if we can just focus in on connecting with that may not lead to change that we will feel tomorrow, but 4 generations down the road.
Right.
When our theys are in our homes, when my sons get to be around people that don't look like them, don't believe like them, all of a sudden they doesn't look like them over there. It looks like, oh, that's my parents' friend, or oh, that's Uncle so and so. You know what I mean?
Right. Oh yeah, for sure. Man, I love it. I really love that idea. And I don't know why it hit me the way it hit me, but like they has to become someone we know. We have to give they a name. And I began to think about that, in the context of right now. You're a pastor. You've been in pastoral leadership for 18 years. You've transitioned. You no longer are at a church in a pastoral role, but you are still pastoring. You're still leading, in Austin. You're leading, businesses and churches. And I thought about what does this concept or this idea of they and knowing them, how does this live out right now in the world that we're living in a professional sense? Like, what does that look like? How would you encourage leaders right now who are struggling to know, like, they're, the people they work beside, they serve alongside, using that same kind of, perspective of they? What would you recommend? What are you hearing right now?
That's a great question. So, like we talked about it in this macro level where it's like, hey, racial tension, the big theys in our media, in our news, and in our culture. But we have these tiny theys in our team and in our offices, right? So for me, a tiny they would look like someone that I just struggle with. And while it may actually be easier right now if many people are working from home, because you're not having to deal with such and such in the office or so-and-so down the hall, but another word for they would be such and such or so-and-so, where it's like, man, some of my biggest struggles, honestly, I've been fortunate enough to have a decently healthy marriage. I mean, my husband drives me crazy, but overall he's okay. And
we do
my
that.
kids are, my kids are super, super normal. So they have their moments and they're teenagers, but I've had a lot of struggles with work dynamics. And I think sometimes it's been because I haven't acknowledged that I've seen someone, maybe because they have a different personality or a different set of strengths or a different set of giftings or talents than I have, and because I don't take the time to understand them. Or, when we sit at a meeting, I mean, think about when you sit at a board meeting. I'm not just sitting across from someone, I'm sitting across from everything they've experienced. So, and not just what they experienced yesterday at home, but like how they were raised, how they understand the world. One example that comes to mind is I'm an only child. We were talking about this earlier because my husband is not. So I'm an only child, and I was managing a couple of people on our church staff a few years ago, and they were not only children. And we got into a heated discussion during a meeting. And I immediately felt the tension. And I was like, get me out of this room right now. I can't be here. These people aren't agreeing. I could feel it in my body. I was like, this is not. So the meeting kind of wraps up, and I felt like the tension just hung in the air, and we get in the car with the same people that the tension is between. And I was like, guys, that was a terrible meeting. And they were like, what are you talking about? I was like, did you not feel all that? And they were like, yeah, it was awesome. We disagreed.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, and they said, oh, you don't have siblings. You don't know what it's like to disagree and then turn around and go hang out together.
Yeah.
And so when I think about what does this look on a micro level, like think about the people that you work with, the teams that you lead. Don't take for granted that you know what they come from. Don't take for granted that their background is like yours.
Right.
They may not be like you may not be like totally, objectifying them and putting them in a different category, but you may still have this tension between you that might not go away. You might not always agree, but an understanding, again, an understanding will develop. And as soon as we start to truly have understanding of one another, change starts to
Yeah.
unfold.
Man, that is so good. So good. Guys, if you are just being inspired like I'm inspired and you have any questions or comments, I like to pose the same question to our listeners today. How are you giving they a name? How are you in this crazy season, this ever-changing work environment, whatever environment it is? How are you just making sure that you are taking the time to learn, to communicate, to connect in this season of separation and isolation? It is so easy, and one of the things that's one of our leadership principles is, our pillars, we call them, is everyone has value. So regardless of anything that you do, regardless of your contribution to the team, before you give us an idea, before you even carry out a task, you have value. And so with that, it is my responsibility, to pursue you, to learn, to know you. And I've experienced this as well on the church side. This season has made it, really difficult for, I would say, churches and congregations without a solid, strong community to keep people, just because the work of knowing who you serve beside, knowing who sits next to you, hasn't been done. And so we've shown up, and we get really excited. I don't want to get too preachy, but we get really excited about numbers, but there's no depth. And the same happens in our organizations. To be a leader without an office now, to be a leader who can't be in the same room with someone. This is really just a phenomenon that I think all of us are experiencing. But what you've kind of walked us through today is encouraging. So thank you so much for that. Again, guys, bring us some questions. Give us, your feedback. How do you continue to give they a name in your professional environments? What are you doing in this season where isolation is almost required in a lot of respects? So, but yeah, I love that, man. That is so good. And I don't know if you've got a book in you or you're working on something. I'm just going to go
Well,
ahead and just be like, hey, you need to keep writing, because your way of communicating. I think it teaches us, but I think it's also relatable. So I love that idea.
well, I'm going to ask you a question, actually,
Yeah.
because while we're waiting for some questions to pour in or some thoughts, because I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, okay, so when have I been a they?
Hmm.
Because I can self-reflect and think, okay, well, I've kind of done some theying in my life, but so I'm going to ask you that question. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about it. So when have you felt like I am being treated like a they? I know for me, I will never forget sitting in a room and in my particular situation, most pastors, when I'm in a room full of pastors, most of them are men.
Hmm.
I mean, there are several denominations that ordain women, and not that I want to get into a theological conversation about the ordination of women, but most of the time I've been in a room of men. And when the Me Too movement was really at the height of
Yeah.
media and our culture,
Yeah.
there were several conversations that took place that I found very interesting. And I thought, I'm the they in the room. I'm the woman sitting in the room, and all these men are talking about this movement and talking around how do we navigate this and lead our churches. And and I do not think it was intentional, but for the most part, there was never a consideration of, well, perhaps we should ask the woman in the
Yeah.
room. And I don't think that was because I think I use the word ignorant a lot in the most pure sense of the word, meaning
Sure.
I literally don't understand or I literally don't know what I'm doing. And so I do think that was my case in that moment. They weren't thinking. They literally just didn't think about that. And so, but I'd be curious for you. So as a female, I've definitely experienced that.
Yeah.
What would you say for you has been a they moment?
Of late, with everything happening in our world, being a black man, I have become they. I think that voice has gotten a lot louder. There are so many people who are willing to have conversations and understand. But that has not always been the case, where, you people, there's not quite as much willingness to hear a different perspective or point of view, specifically if it makes you uncomfortable. But to, like you said, to experience, having worked in education in like the inner city area, kind of like thinking of ways to strategically reach a specific demographic. We talked about it, we talked around it, but I like before I was a leader in education, I was just, I would say a leader, but a teacher in education before I was a principal. We would create, systems, and they would kind of be delivered to us versus like taking the time to create or give a place for someone who is that demographic you're trying to reach, a voice or and I think I'm saying every organization's like this, but I have felt that before, like, hey guys, I'm in the room. I would love to be a part of creating systems that would potentially meet this need that we've all agreed upon. Like, that's the thing, people often agree upon it, but oftentimes there's like a lack of maybe representation. And so yeah, it kind of happens a lot. I've experienced it, professionally, racially, educationally, and I think what I've experienced recently, and I've shared this with a few different people, in the midst of everything happening in society, as we are trying to figure out the complexities of like, understanding and communicating and giving place for, understanding a diversity of worldview. It's so deep. We have to we really have to give place and time for those voices to be heard, for those ideas to be heard, and it's really, really important to do that. Sorry, my audio's acting up on me, so I'm going to transition here. Hopefully you can hear me now.
That awesome microphone's not working.
Well, I think the mic is working, but my speakers are not. But so yeah, I think that one of the things that really stuck out to me in this season is when I had friends who just reached out to talk, reached out to ask questions, to seek to understand, to really just sit in the discomfort of, not having all of the answers, but understanding there's a reality and a worldview, like you mentioned earlier, that this person carries, and it is different, but it requires, the investment of time. Yeah. So that's a fantastic question. And you really made
Sorry,
me
you're supposed to be the one asking questions, right?
No, I love it. This is a conversation. Like I said, listeners, guys, if something has resonated with you, please, jump in this conversation. This is a dialogue here. Zach has a really good question. He said, what's a practical first step to start these relationship conversations? I look around my community and most people look and think like me. I'll let you take a stab at that one. That's a great question. That's a great question.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I think about, Zach, is one, to acknowledge that what you just said, that possibly my community actually does look a lot like me. I can remember being in seminary and someone saying, well, what are the demographics of your church? Mm-hmm. And at that time I was serving a church that was in a mostly white community. Mm. And because of the seminary I went to, that was not the case at the actual campus. So they were kind of like, I felt like they were coming at me because my congregation wasn't diverse enough. Mm-hmm. But I did have to start with the vantage point of, hey, this is where I am. This is the community with where I am. And I'm not going to allow myself to feel guilty about that or to be upset about that. But what I am going to do is have to take steps outside that community to have those intentional conversations. So in an office setting, what a practical first step would look like. And I realize we have other boundaries and constraints in terms of like HR and regulation. Mm-hmm. Oh, Zach's pointing out in the chat that we got, I think, a little bit of an echo.
Do we? Okay. Go ahead.
Do we have an echo? Oh, you're fine. And so I think that the first thing we can do in an office setting, right, is if we're having someone we struggle with, and it's possibly not necessarily because of a different skin color or a different faith background, it's probably because we actually have some conflict within that dynamic. I think we can have conversations, and I realize we have to do those around parameters. But when we start looking at actual in my community, so who I'm living next to, I do think that you can actually I know that in ABBA, one of the things we do is make sure that we're connected across denominational lines. Mm-hmm. So it gives me the opportunity to say, hey, Pastor so-and-so, I know you lead an African American congregation. Can we have a conversation? I just want to take you to coffee, or I want to set up a Zoom meeting. And I'm coming from a place where I just have a lot of questions. Even, I know for me, when coronavirus was really new to us, so like probably mid-April, I guess, I really found myself frustrated about a particular dynamic that I saw on the news over and over and over. And it was an interview that I saw repeatedly, and it just brought a lot of frustration in me. And I really didn't know where the frustration was coming from. But I called a friend who lives in Nashville, and I said, hey, I'm hearing this on this interview, and it's actually making me a little angry and irritated. But because she had the same career as the person in the interview, I said, can you share for me? This happened to be a medical thing. I said, can you share for me what you understand? And even though I couldn't talk to the person that was on the news being interviewed, I could talk to someone that was in a similar position. And it gave me the opportunity. All of a sudden, when she started to explain to me her feelings, her experiences, and her thoughts as a medical professional in the environment she was in, I was like, okay, that makes a lot more sense. And so now what happens is that's a new lens. That's a new layer to my filter and a new layer to my lens. And I'm able to go, now when I see those interviews or I'm hearing those conversations, I'm able to understand it in a different way because I took the time. Even if I couldn't get directly to the person that is kind of causing my emotion to jump up in me, I can get as close as I can just to try and widen my understanding. Does that make sense? So I think, I guess, I feel like Zach's question's like, okay, yeah, but so what do? I think it's email, text, or call and ask to have a conversation. I think, we just start there. And if you're like, well, I literally have no one I can email, text, or call, then you email, text, or call Graylin, and he will put you in touch with someone that you can have a conversation with. So I just think we have to do it. And a word you used earlier, Graylin, when you were talking about what alignment leadership does, like when Align comes in and tries to help an organization, one of the things you talked about was want to make sure that everyone knows they have value. Mm-hmm. But you use the word within your conversation about that, you use the word work. And it's going to take work. It's not going to happen. And when we were running a young adult ministry, my young adults, we had a 20-somethings ministry for a while, and they would get so excited about like, we're going to go build a well over here, or I bought these shoes and it meant so got shoes over here, or I bought this DVD. That's how long ago I was in young adult ministry. People bought DVDs, and I got this bracelet, and that money goes over here. And I think all those are wonderful, and we need to do all those things. But I believe if we want to see real sustained change, it's probably going to take several generations of real intentional conversations. And I think that what we want quickly is a solution, but if we want a remedy, it's just going to take work. Like I love the word salvation. Obviously, it's part of my job, but like I love that the root word for it is salve, like a salve, like you put on a wound, right? So we're going to do this over and over until that wound is healed. And so nationally, we have a wound. We've had a wound for a long time. We've neglected it. It's festered. We've put surface level stuff, like we'll just put a Band-Aid on it. But what it's going to take is repeatedly having those conversations that are awkward and difficult and require work to actually see that thing heal. But it's going to take a long time to heal. It's not going to happen quickly.
Right. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
You can? Okay. One of the things that everything you're saying just continues to bring up the word vulnerability. Like there is a vulnerability that is required to take the first step, to listen, to even initiate or engage in a conversation with someone who potentially thinks so much different than you. I think it's safe to stay within our community. But as soon as you think about engaging in a conversation or seeking to understand someone else, you are taking a step and you're being incredibly vulnerable because you might not like the information you get back. You may not like, and that's the work of it. And I think that
and we have to be willing to not like it. Yeah,
that's exactly right. I love that. I love that. Another great question. Kinsey asked, what do you think is the cause of they? What do you think is the cause of they?
And it's funny she asked that because as you were just talking, I was thinking I think that to acknowledge that our they comes naturally. So they've done so many studies around unconscious bias, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've done, I mean, one of my favorite books that came out forever ago about parenting is called Nurture Shock. And it's just debunking some of the myths of how to raise kids, right? Which I think I read it when I was pregnant with my first. So that was a long time ago. But it was fascinating to me to see how the things that we attribute as bad, some of them just kind of come kind of naturally. Like we subconsciously can be kind of self-centered. We subconsciously are drawn toward people that look and think like us. That's not something we're trying to do, right? And so I think that part of what happens is we get a lot of shame and guilt for feeling like, well, I'm not doing enough. And it's like, well, it's not. They're on a very base level, and subconsciously we are connected to people that look and think like us, right. I.e. that's where the work comes in, right? Again, we go back to that shared identity, right? I mean, if I'm going to go into a room right now, if you and Zach and I, since we had that conversation previously, are thrown into a room with 200 people, and I know no one but you two, I'm going to stand next to you because I have this thing, right? And that's not bad. That's not wrong. But what it means is I have to do the work,
right,
to get kind of out of that box. And it's like you said, it's vulnerability. I mean, it's the idea of saying, hey, I mean, what would it look like to say, hey, I don't have enough friends that don't look like me? I mean, I don't think many leaders would want to admit that, right? That sounds silly because what we tend to do is we throw out that one token relationship. Oh, yeah. Well, I've got my friend so-and-so. And that's good. And that's a great starting point. But what does it look like to admit I don't have enough people around me that don't think like me? There's that verse that iron sharpens iron, right? And I think we prefer for feather to sharpen feather because it's so much gentler. But iron sharpens iron means sparks are going to fly, right? It's going to get heated. It's going to be intense. And I think being okay with that and being willing to like you just said, I'm willing to hear things maybe I don't want to hear, but I also have to ask myself, am I willing to listen to things I don't want to listen to? Am I willing to hear things that I can and still maintain my own passions and beliefs? Like, I think we go into these conversations with a lot of fear that I'm going to compromise something. And I believe you can have these conversations without compromising your own beliefs, ideals, and passions. You just are broadening your understanding.
Wow.
So anyway, I mean, I guess like Kenzie, for me, it's like you're kind of made to connect to someone with a shared identity. So you have to do the work of getting out of it. So I think these are very natural.
I completely agree with that. I think, one of the things we talk about a lot in alignment leadership is just you have an understanding that everyone's worldview contributes to the culture, and so the way we define worldview, hopes, preferences, traditions, experiences, and beliefs. And like you said, without any intention at all, those experiences, that worldview begins to define who they are. Yeah. And you don't even have to be trying, to intentionally be biased towards something. It just kind of it's in our makeup. And so that's a kind of good transition to this next question from Josh Boyer. How do you gently or lovingly influence those whom you know are unaware of what you're experiencing as a they?
Go ahead, Graylan. Sorry. I'm just unpacking that question.
Yeah. How do you gently or lovingly influence those whom you know are unaware of what you're experiencing as a they? So I think of your example of being a woman in ministry, or being a Black man in education, or any environment. Really, how do you begin to extend, lovingly teach, influence, however you want to, I don't know.
I love that Josh included gentle and lovingly, because honestly, your first reaction is, excuse me, I'm in the room, and defend. I can remember being in a class, and I was in a teaching rotation for adults, and we were in an adult class, and I was one of 3 teachers, and I did my segment, and then I went and sat in the back of the room. And then another pastor got up, and he was doing his segment, and he said, I recognize that Jen is here, but I do not believe she is an ordained pastor. I do not believe she has. And I'm like, I'm in the room, and everybody looks back. And so how do I gently and lovingly, I think for me, and everybody is accountable to their own choices and how they choose to lead and how they choose to facilitate or not facilitate these conversations. But for me, I try to slow down my response, slow down and listen. And then I look for discernment. I try and listen with a different mindset. And I realize, okay, so obviously for me, that's what prayer is, right? I'm slowing down and I'm listening with discernment, which is just my definition for prayer. So I'm asking myself, I'm like, okay, God, like, is this the time?
Mm-hmm.
Or because I can't tell so and so, hey, you need to do the work that it takes to love they. Because I think that in my writing, what I wrote about is one of my favorite parables of the Pharisee and the tax collector, right? Where the Pharisees, the religious leaders in the back of the room looking down on the guy at the front of the room. And the front of the room guy is just like, I'm not worthy. I want grace. I need mercy. I want help. And the Pharisee's like, oh, thank God I'm not like that guy. But the problem is, and I love Jesus's teaching is so dynamic. I love it. So when that guy stands up and says, well, thank God I'm not arrogant like a Pharisee, he becomes the very thing he sorry, my computer blanked out. He becomes the very thing he's critical of, right? So
Right.
I think one of the things I think of in terms of Josh's thing is like, be careful that we're not becoming the very thing we're pushing against. And so in that moment, in that room, when that person said that, for me to stand up and start arguing biblical points, it's not going to accomplish what I think it's going to accomplish. What would have been great, and I didn't do it. I took a more passive aggressive approach that we can discuss another time, but I was younger. And so what I should have done probably is said, hey, let's go sit down and talk about this. Tell me where you're coming from theologically. And so I think that, again, gentle and lovingly often takes more time than like brute force, right? That's why I think that's where we struggle. We think we got to fix this tomorrow. Okay, and I think we should take steps. I don't think that means nothing, but I think the realization that even gently and lovingly nudging someone, hey, I think you're kind of treating me wrong, or you're treating a whole group of people wrong. Trying to shift someone's ideology, whether it be a political ideology or a faith orient, it takes a long time. It takes you're trying to unpack things that have been built into most likely into their family system forever. And so if you just go in and start ripping that stuff up, you're ripping up their identity. So it takes a long time. You would never want a surgeon to be like, you're laying on the table and he's like, we're just going to get this done in 5 minutes. You'd be like, no, I'd like you to take your time and make sure you're doing this right and doing this. And you also wouldn't want them to like come in and be like, we're going to get it done in 5 minutes. After the first minute, I'm going to hand it over to someone else. So if you're wanting to lovingly be with someone, you have to ask yourself, am I going to be able to sustain this relationship and this conversation? Because it's not going to be a one-time conversation. So can I consistently have these little moments with this person and ask good questions? Jesus asked way more questions than we realize. He asked way more questions than he gave answers. In fact, it would drive people crazy because he'd answer questions with a question, right? So ask, why do you think that? How do you think that would feel, in another scenario, or if you were kind of try and flip the coin or turn the prism, so to speak, to say, hey, look at this from a different way. What could that look like? As soon as we're asking really solid questions, it causes people, it forces them to explore their own ideals and own them. Because sometimes you'll have someone say, well, that's just wrong. And when you ask them why, and they realize they have no clue why, it helps them unpack their own stuff versus you just going in and ripping up their ideologies.
Right. Yeah. There is no easy way. I think there is, it's work. I think there is a way to do it to salvage relationship, to strengthen relationship. But there's no easy way. And there's one more question. I think we kind of touched on some of it, and it says, I think this is from Lois Coley.
I know Lois. She's in Nashville.
Hey, all right, Nashville represent. Sometimes it's hard to keep a conversation level where we're listening. Too often it turns into a debate where we're trying to convince each other to agree with our opinions. How do we avoid that scenario? And that's, I think you were kind of touching on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that different personalities are going to approach that differently because some
Right.
people, and Lois knows me, so she's going to laugh when I say, I love a debate. Like, and I get animated and I do a
Hmm.
lot of this, and I actually may kind of even get my voice, but I'm not angry. Like, I actually just get really excited. I love when your passion or your ideas doesn't match with mine. That kind of gives me a fire. But
Sure.
my husband, we'll use him as an example. He doesn't like any of that. Like he's going to be like, no, I don't want to argue. I don't like, what are we doing? And so actually one of my youth a long time ago videoed us having a conversation about the theory behind absolute truth and relative, all this other stuff. But I was like this, and he's like, no. And so I think that, Lois, one of the things I'm thinking is, one, recognize personalities in the room. Not
Right.
everybody can handle arguing, and also, but then also, because some personalities are terrified of arguing, whether it be
Right.
they grew up in a household that argued and they don't want anything to do with that, and so they equate sharing a viewpoint passionately with, you're yelling at me. And so know that, take the time to get to know that. And then I think there's nothing wrong with calling a timeout.
Right.
Hey, I think we're getting a little heated here. Let's time out. Let's talk about the weather. Let's talk about the sports that we're not watching, or let's talk about something else, something totally off topic. And then maybe we can reapproach, or maybe we just get together again another time. But you can even preempt that. You can say, hey,
Yes.
before we start this conversation, things can get a little passionate, but you don't want to die down. You don't want to, like, keep a damper on passion. You want people to
Right.
passionately express their opinions.
I completely agree with that. And one of the things that comes to mind as we start to land the plane is this is back in education. One of the things we would do when we were like encouraging kids to participate or students to participate is this: we implement this strategy called just wait time. Just wait a second.
Yeah.
Before I'm immediately bombarding you, with dialogue or another question, create some space. And I think that's one of the things that oftentimes, and you said it earlier, is just listening. And if you begin to recognize that the conversation is moving this direction, I think there is no better way to serve or love somebody than to just acknowledge that in the very beginning. Like, hey, we're getting into a deep conversation, and
Yeah.
I want to have this conversation. But to go further, I think to add on to what Lois, another question she had is like creating healthy boundaries so they don't
Yeah.
like spiral into a debate, out of a discussion. I think just creating space, getting some wait time, slowing the conversation down, and I think even before you get into the conversation, kind of laying out the rules of engagement, because
Mm-hmm.
you're absolutely right. These, like a lot of these things, these beliefs, this worldview, our perceptions of people, whatever you want to say, is definitely rooted in our family history, in our
Mm-hmm.
upbringing, all of those things, and their weighty matters. But we still need to have the conversation. So I love that. Oh man, I love it. This has been a fantastic conversation. The theme of today has been connect to change, connect to make a change. And Jen, you're doing that. Yeah, Abba is doing that. And before we conclude today, one thing I want to just revisit is
Yeah.
GLS. GLS online
Yes.
happening August 6th and 7th. Alignment Leadership is the title sponsor
Mm-hmm.
this year, but we are partnering hand in hand with ABBA to make this event a reality and something worthwhile for every person a part of it. So, real quick plug, Jen, how do you want to set up GLS for our listeners today?
Well, if you don't already have your ticket, I just want you to go get one. And let me
I
explain
love it.
why. And I love it's such a perfect match for alignment and us. So GLS is 2 days of world class leadership training. You're not going to get this kind of content. I mean, some amazing marquee speakers, and without going down the list of 16 different speakers you're going to get over those 2 days. So because of restrictions and mandates, we are going to offer it online in August, but in November we're going to take just the best of the best from those 2 days. We're going to combine them with live speakers. So we're going to put hopefully, maybe even some of the speakers you see in August will actually be joining us in Austin in November. We're crossing our fingers for that one, but we're definitely going to have some live speakers there, networking opportunities. You're going to get to come meet the guys from Alignment Leadership, see what they can offer your company, see what they can do for your teams and your organizations. You're going to get to meet the ABBA team, and you're going to get to meet a lot of, again, we're building bridges. We're bringing leaders across the city together for 2 days. And this stuff is practical, guys. This is like, hey, it's going to be similar conversations like we're having, but from from like super duper speakers that are coming in and saying, hey, this is what's happening in culture, this is what's happening in society, this is what's happening in leadership, and here's what's happening in the marketplace. You don't want to miss it, and your ticket gets you both events, the online 2-day event and the November 2-day event.
Yes, and that is GLS Austin.
GLS, yeah, GLS-Austin.com. That's where you're going to go. So www.gls-austin.com.
I encourage every one of our listeners, if you are in the Austin area, I'm in San Antonio, I'm coming up. It is going to be an incredible event, something that you will not want to miss, and you can take away so much. One more time, give it up for Jen. You have been an incredible guest. I have loved our conversation today. Again, if you don't follow her, Jennifer_Mazzola at Instagram.com. Follow her. She's got a lot of things in the pipeline, but you get to hear some of her heart today. Again, thank you guys so much for being with us. We look forward to seeing you next week, Tuesday, same time, same place, 12 p.m. noon Central Time. Have a fantastic day, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.